by now for the fifth performance of See It Now with Edward R. Murrow, which originates in the actual control room of Studio 41 in New York City and in Washington, Boston, Milwaukee, Key West, London, Paris, and Korea. Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America, in cooperation with CBS Television, presents the distinguished reporter and news analyst Edward R. Murrow in See It Now, a document for television based on the week's news and told through the actual voices and faces that made the news. Edited and produced by Mr. Murrow and Fred W. Friendly. A public service of Aluminum Company of America, the nation's leading producer of aluminum. Now speaking to you from the actual control room of Studio 41 is the editor of See It Now, Edward R. Murrow.
Good afternoon. This may come to be known as the year of the fantastic witnesses. A whole procession of them have passed before various committees. None more remarkable than T. Lamar Caudle, the Assistant Attorney General. He revealed that he had a great many friends, and his revelations embarrassed some of his friends. He set off a chain reaction that reached to the Department of Justice and the White House. Now, his brief testimony, here it is, beginning just after he learned that he had been fired by the President.
I told the Attorney General that if he would excuse me, I'd like to go home and be with Mrs. Caudle. And I went home, and I never have seen such an avalanche of photographers, reporters, and all the days of my life hit my house at one time, just like a cloudburst.
Sometime after the photographers left the Caudle home, Mr. Caudle found himself explaining to a House committee what he did when he heard his name mentioned as part of a clique in Washington that was supposed to be trying to get a $500,000 shakedown from Abraham Teitelbaum. Committee Counsel DeWind asked the question.
In connection with a tax extortion story.
Yes, sir.
And that didn't concern you?
Yes, it did concern me, too.
Well, what did you do about it?
I did not do anything about it, Mr. DeWind.
Counsel DeWind found this hard to believe.
You didn't even mention it to the person that was over you in the department, did you?
No, sir. Not that I recall. Sure didn't.
At the end of 5 days of testimony, 26 hours before the committee, Mr. Caudle had a word of advice for fat men.
To the general public, if there is a fat man in this building who has not the character to live up to a diet and to reduce, if he wants a sure remedy to reduce, just come before the King Committee. More
seriously, he summed up his case.
I may have been guilty of some indiscretions, which hindsight would not let happen again. But I tell you this, sir, I have not done a dishonest thing. I have been proud of the record that I have. I have been very much embarrassed about this. I want you to know that, sir.
But Chairman King disagreed.
I do believe, however, that a fair-minded person, hearing all of the testimony, could hardly escape the conclusion that you, an occupant of one of the highest offices in the government, were guilty at least of such gross indiscretions as to constitute a breach of your public trust.
Outside of the tax investigation, congressional activity was rather limited in Washington, but it was not so throughout the nation, with at least a third of the senators beating the Bushes back home, preparatory to getting out the vote in '52. In Milwaukee, the junior senator from Wisconsin opened his campaign at a testimonial dinner where they hailed him as a courageous American who was being smeared.
Well, you'd sometimes think to hear the quartet that call themselves Operation Truth damning Joe McCarthy and resorting to the vilest smears I've ever heard. Well, this is the answer.
That's ex-Congressman Frank Keith, the Toastmaster, who plucked a carnation and dedicated a poem to Senator McCarthy.
If I could express it in what's in my heart right now, I do it in the terms of the poet who once said, "Ah, 'tis but a dainty flower I bring to you. Yes, 'tis but a violet, glistening with dew. But still in its heart there lie beauties concealed. So in our heart, our love for you lies unrevealed."
Two senators, Walker of Idaho and Butler of Maryland, spoke glowingly of McCarthy and warned the Wisconsin voters to beware of the great smear campaign of lies which was being launched against him. The senator, too, talked of the ordeal by smear he had just been subjected to, and then, in a mood seldom seen by the American people, said he was overwhelmed.
You know, I used to pride myself on the idea that I was a bit tough, especially over the past 18 or 19 months when we've been kicked around and bullwhipped and damned. I didn't think that I could be touched very deeply. But tonight, frankly, my cup and my heart is so full I can't talk to you.
We, too, agree with the senator in his disdain for politics by smear. We have no way of knowing what the senator's thoughts were at this emotional moment in his career. But from here, we could not refrain from recalling another McCarthy on other days.
The planks in Mr. Lattimore's platform are identical to the planks in the platform of the Communist Party.
The law firm that was on record as the agent of Communist Poland was the law firm of Dean Gooderham Atchison. The almost criminal folly of the disastrous Marshall mission to China.
Who paid for the smear campaign against nationalist China, a campaign that was so successfully pioneered by the publication of Mr. Jessup's organization.
We played recordings of those last 3 or 4 sentences from earlier speeches by Senator McCarthy to remind us of a time when he was attacking, or smearing, whichever you like, Atchison, Marshall, Lattimore, and others. It would appear that the difference between smearing and straightforward attack depends upon whose reputation is being gored. The senator himself is now under attack. Several good friends of ours who know a great deal more about television than we do have suggested that we ought to have a forum, a round table, that people are interested in such things. So we have one. It's brief. We filmed it at Key West with some White House correspondents. Our moderator is our White House correspondent, Charles Collingwood.
Will President Truman run again in 1952? For the first speaker, I call upon the eminent correspondent of the New York Times, Mr. W.H. Lawrence, Bill Lawrence.
Well, Brother Collingwood, I was looking at my beach ball down there this morning, and I must say it was about as clouded as that crystal ball we had in 1948, which showed us all that Governor Dewey was going to be the next president. Unlike Will Rogers, all I know is what I write in the paper. If you ask me whether the president's going to run again in 1952, I say sure he is, unless he can persuade General Eisenhower to run.
Thank you, Bill Lawrence. Now, is there anyone who wishes to say him nay? My colleague, Mr. Nixon, of the International News Service.
I'm as convinced as I can be on a basis of many things that the president himself has indicated, that he has a very deep personal desire to retire from the presidency next year. But I am certain that his final decision has not been made and will not be made until he knows for certain who the Republican candidate is going to be next summer.
How about you, Joe Fox? You've been around Washington for a long time and around the White House working for the Washington Star. What do you think that the president's going to do?
Well, Charlie, for my money, there is not now and there has not been for a long time any ifs, ands, or buts about this thing. The boss will be back on the back platform again next summer. That you can count on. In the first place, the Democratic Party has got to run on Truman's record. And you've got to think of something else. Terry Grayson, who used to be Woodrow Wilson's private physician and was around Washington for a long time, had a very profound observations about the coming and going of presidents. He used to say, well, I've seen a lot of them. I've seen them leave the White House, and they left it with a smile on their lips. But, brother, they had a pain in their belly that no physician could cure.
Now, Frank Holman of the New York Daily News, you've been lying back there long and lazy during all of this conversation. What do you think that President Truman is going to do in 1952?
Well, Charlie, it's very simple for me, just like it is for Joe. I think Mr. Truman will run for re-election unless somebody offers him a better job. Now, after all, fellas, look around. It's a pretty good job. He's got a fair wage, even with rising prices, and a daughter. He's got a good expense account and tax-free. He's got a yacht. He's got an airplane. Well, I think he's pretty much stuck with this one. He's always been a practical fella, and any practical man would take this one.
Well, gentlemen, I think we have demonstrated that we don't know any more about what the president is going to do than anyone else does. So let us adjourn the Sun and Sand Forum and say farewell to colorful Key West, where the president vacations and the correspondents try to figure out what he's doing.
Now you know. On Thursday of this week, the French Parliament passed the Schuman Plan. That's the almost revolutionary plan to pool the coal and steel resources of Western Europe. It was a great victory for the Pleven government. It must, of course, still be ratified by the other governments of Western Europe. But when René Pleven and Jean Monnet, who actually wrote the plan, came back to their office, our correspondent David Schoenbrunn was there to greet them.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Félicitations. It was a good day for you, wasn't it? Hello, Mr. Monnet. How are you, sir? You've won a very big vote in the Parliament today, Mr. Pleven, haven't you?
Yes, I'm very proud of the French Parliament, who has issued a vote which I think is an historical one. In front of many difficulties, the representatives of the French people have shown that France wanted to build a new Europe.
As the movement for economic unity on the continent progresses, the position of Britain becomes more and more important. As you know, there are no coaxial cables from here to London or to Europe. So we made a telephone call to our correspondent Howard K. Smith in London, and we filmed what he had to say over there. He'll be up in just a moment.
Hello, New York. Hello, Ed Murrow. This is Howard Smith reporting in London. Hello, Ed.
Hello, Howard. It's obvious from here that the British aren't supporting either the Schuman Plan or active participation in a European army. How do you explain this?
Well, the reasons given here, Ed, are these. First, in relation to the European army. The British say that they have commitments all over the globe in every continent on Earth, and as you know, troubles frequently break out in those commitments. And if something happens, as in Egypt or in Iran or possibly in Hong Kong, the British say they have to be able to send their divisions there at a moment's notice. And if their troops were tied down in a highly integrated, complex European command, they could not move those troops with freedom. So they're against the idea. Now, in regard to the Schuman Plan, that is looked on here as the beginning of the economic unification of Europe, and the British are deathly shy of any prospect of abandoning any of their economic sovereignty for this reason. Now, if Britain joined in any economic unification scheme with the countries of Europe, she would automatically have to share that preferred position with some of her bitterest trade competitors, such as Germany. And Britain would thereby automatically sell less in her Commonwealth countries than she does now. And frankly, if Britain sold any less to the world than she does now, she couldn't pay her way and would be in a very severe economic crisis.
Well, what you say certainly adds, Howard. But tell me this. Do you think that there is any chance that the British might possibly change their mind later on?
Well, I don't see how the British can change their minds, Ed, unless those national interests change, and that doesn't seem to be likely. However, I would say I think that later on there's going to be a change in Britain's attitude to this extent. I think Britain will become more cooperative towards helping the other European countries to unite. I think that change will happen after Mr. Churchill's visit to Washington in January. People here have the impression right now, Ed, that Mr. Churchill plans to do some serious bargaining with us when he goes to Washington. And in order to bargain, he has to have some bargaining points. So right now, he's saying no strongly to just about everything in the expectation, I believe, of yielding on some of those points if we yield to him on some others when he comes to Washington. With that, I'd better sign off and say this is Howard K. Smith reporting from London and returning you to Edward R. Murrow in New York.
Time now for the Alcoa commercial. And if we may be permitted a little regional pride and nostalgia, we're rather glad that they decided to start with one of our favorite rivers.
Here along the Columbia River in the state of Washington, the defense of our country is being strengthened. Under construction, another new plant to produce aluminum. Another Alcoa plant, the Wenatchee Reduction Works of Aluminum Company of America. From here will flow aluminum for countless wartime uses. Jet fighters, super bazookas, pontoon bridges, PT boats. How is this part of America's defense program going? On schedule. Every week, construction reports from 5 new Alcoa plants and additions all over the country come to the Pittsburgh headquarters of Alcoa. Every job on schedule. Because aluminum is essential to defense, Alcoa wants you to know about the rapid growth of this industry in just the past 12 years. This block represents all the aluminum produced in the United States in 1939. 327 million pounds. World War II was then flaming in Europe. Alcoa, with its own funds, had started an expansion program. The result was that during the war, Alcoa's production of this light, strong metal in its own plants was more than doubled. In addition, Alcoa built and operated 9 aluminum plants for the U.S. government, which produced 800 million pounds a year. The planes for our American Air Force were built almost entirely with aluminum, made in plants owned or operated by Alcoa. And the end of World War II did not mark the end of Alcoa expansion. Still more new plants were built and put into operation. With the new plants and additions now under construction, Alcoa's annual production will be raised to 1,300,000,000 pounds. 4 times as much as 1939. In this way, Alcoa continues to meet its responsibility as the leading producer of a vital metal, aluminum, by Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America.
These are days of mechanical and electronic marvels. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology has developed a new one for the Navy. It's a whirlwind electronic computer. With considerable trepidation, we undertake to interview this new machine. Now to MIT and the computer lab at Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Hello, New York. Hello, New York. This is Cambridge. And this is the oscilloscope of the whirlwind electronic computer.
I assume that, like any delicate, finely tuned piece of mechanism, this has a human element involved, too, has it?
Yes, Mr. Murrow. I am J. Forrester, director of the Digital Computer Laboratory where Whirlwind was built.
Well, I wonder if we could take a look around, sir.
Yes. Let's first look at one of the storage tubes, such as Whirlwind uses for memory. Whirlwind stores in these tubes information in 25 millionths of a second. And further down the row, you can see some of the electronic circuits which make Whirlwind work. Would you like to try to use the machine?
Yes, of course, but I have an idea, Mr. Forrester. Since this computer was made in conjunction with the Office of Naval Research, why don't we switch down to the Pentagon in Washington and let the Navy's research chief, Admiral Bolster, give Whirlwind a workout. What's your problem, Admiral?
Well, Ed, this problem concerns the Navy's Viking rocket. This rocket goes up 135 miles into the sky. Now, at the standard rate of fuel consumption, I would like to see the computer trace the flight path of this rocket and see how it can determine at any instant, say at the end of 40 seconds, the amount of fuel remaining and the velocity at that instant. The rocket weighs 11,000 pounds at takeoff and carries an initial fuel load of 8,500 pounds.
All right, Mr. Forrester.
All right, Admiral Bolster, we'll see what we can do. Let's look at the oscilloscope where the problem has been set up. Over on the left-hand side, you will notice fuel consumption decreasing as the rocket takes off. And on the right-hand side, there's a scale that shows the rocket velocity. The rocket position is shown by the trajectory that you're now looking at. And as it reaches the peak of its trajectory, the velocity, you will notice, has dropped off to a minimum. Then as the rocket starts down, velocity picks up again toward a maximum velocity when the rocket hits the ground. How's that?
Well, how about that, Admiral?
Looks very good to me.
Well, sir, I'm just a middleman here. I didn't understand the question, and I don't understand the answer. But now let's go back to MIT for a moment. You there, Mr. Foster?
Yes, Mr. Murrow.
Well, let's try another problem on a little more personal level. Let's suppose that back in 1626, I had been an Indian, and I had received for the sale of Manhattan Island, say $24. And if I'd been out covering a story for TV, and then I'd invested that $24 at 6% interest back in 1626, what would I have today?
Well, that would be a good investment. To set up such a problem on the machine, we first have to prepare a control tape, something like this, where the information from the machine has been punched in. That tape is then read into the computer, as you can see over here, and fed into the storage tubes in the other room, where the information is remembered until the machine starts a solution of the problem. Now, the machine started a solution. We see here typing out the answers on a typewriter. From 1926 until 1951, your $24 would have grown to something like $4,027,727,000 and some odd cents. Do you think that would be a good investment?
Thank you, sir, very much indeed. Someday I'll ask you to figure out whether that is before or after taxes. Very fascinating, Mr. Foster.
Very good to have had you with us, Mr. Murrow. And before leaving, we would like to show you another kind of mathematical problem that some of the boys have worked out in their spare time in a less serious vein for Sunday afternoon.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Foster and the MIT labs. This next story is an American story, so American that it could only happen in Korea, Italy, Germany, France, anywhere in the world where American fighting men have gone. In this time when we're worried about international crises and new electronic brains and tax scandals and peace conferences at Panmunjom, we thought it might be useful to picture a piece of invisible equipment that is carried in the packs of American GIs. They called it Operation Mascot.
You have seen these children before, a year and a half ago, just junior-sized ghosts in the newsreels, on the long, hard escape route out of Seoul and Daegu. It has always been this way, children picking in the ruins, as much a part of war as the pock-marked buildings and the gutted tanks on the side of the road. For some reason, American GIs in Africa, Italy, France, Germany, wherever they are sent, cannot resist kids. They adopt as their friends these slow-smiling, trusting youngsters who are part of the human wreckage always left in the wake of war. Some few million of you may remember the phrases, "Any gum, chum?" "Cigarette for papa?" "Chocolate?" and the universal, "No mama, no papa, no bakshish, no per diem." You may remember the excitement of teaching an orphaned kid a few words of English.
That's right. What's his name? Ted Peg.
What's your name?
Ted Peg.
Yeah,
Ted Peg, huh? That's what you got printed on your...
Or watching them grow strong and healthy on GI rations.
Say something.
Who's bucking the line?
Hey, who's bucking the line up there?
What do you think this is, your birthday?
So it has been in Korea. Every unit had its mascots and a few had a dozen. Many of the old outfits were being sent back to the States. So with due ceremony and a few extra Hopalong Cassidy guns flown in from Sears Roebuck, they separated the mascots from their masters.
A chaplain with the first Cav put it this way.
Going back to the States, they don't have a chance to take them with them. I mean, you can't just put them in your duffel bag, and you can't leave them out in the street either.
The troops went home, and the mascots went to orphanages set up by U.S. Army chaplains. These schools are supported in many cases with private funds. Not the least among them, the fund set up by the GIs before they left. But the margin of solvency is slight. Korea is a land of famine, and most of the food comes from the United States. That's rice from California. 100-pound sacks on the backs of kids who weigh considerably less than that. The GIs used to teach them Goodnight Irene and the Song of the Cavalry. Now they sing a more proper kind of song. Correspondent Bob Pierpoint has been in Korea for almost a year, has covered much of the toughest fighting.
Come on now.
He also covered Operation Mascot.
You know, here at this orphanage in Seoul, there are 500 arguments against war. These kids, they didn't start it. They don't want it. They don't know what it's all about. But they're the real victims of this or any other war. And actually, what they want most of all is just a little affection, something they're never really going to get right here in this spot.
There will probably be more children in the debris before the Korean War is ended. More candidates for those homes. And whether the military authorities know of it or approve of it, more mascots with the outfits in the line. For many of these kids, the only arms they can remember have been wrapped in khaki. All armies are brutal, profane, and trained to kill. In the last year, our armies have practiced their profession with great skill and much glory. Many of our boys left 277 of their hard-earned dollars in Korea to keep these kids in homes like this. That's what it costs for a year. We have introduced you to these Korean children because, like the cameramen who sent in the pictures and like the GIs in Korea, we could not resist them. And we did it also because we believe that in a world where there is no security for small children, there is no security for adults. And also that in a world where there is no security for small nations, there is no security for great nations.
This
Good afternoon.
is aluminum.
Good luck.
Nature made it light. Alcoa made it plentiful and low in price. This is aluminum, a better kind of ladder made of a light metal that lasts. Easier to handle, easier to carry. Ladders of Alcoa aluminum weigh only about 1 pound per foot. They stay strong, as good as new for years and years. Used at home and at business, aluminum ladders make all kinds of jobs easier. There will be more and more ladders of Alcoa aluminum when our country's defense needs have been met. Aluminum from the ever-expanding facilities of America's foremost producer, Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America. See It Now, like the I Can Hear It Now record albums, is edited and produced by Mr. Morrow and Fred W. Friendly. Special assignments were performed for CBS by News of the Day cameramen in the field. This is the CBS Television Network.